Okay. Welcome to kinesiology. So kinesiology is one of the hardest subjects that you will encounter on the MBLEx, and that's why a lot of people take this tutoring session, because they really need work on it. And so, I mean, kinesiology, it's a lot of just repetition with going over this information and really identifying where these are, especially on your own body. If you're able to identify these spots on your own body, that makes it a lot easier, especially when you go and take the test, because you can use your body as a cheat sheet, right? Like, nobody's going to stop you from actually palpating your muscles to figure out what the origin and insertion of these muscles are. Okay, so with the MBLEx, a lot of the kinesiology information is kind of hidden in these scenario-based questions where it'll give a sentence or two saying this person is doing this, and then you have to figure out, okay, what muscles are actually involved in these actions. Like if somebody's holding something heavy, their shoulder is going to be up like this, right? Like what muscles are going to perform this action and keep it in that kind of contraction? What contraction is that? Okay, so it's a lot of that kind of information that you need to know. So you think about the muscles that perform that specific action. You can make a list of all the muscles that perform that action to make it a little bit easier for you. Remember, that's elevation of the scapula, right? What muscles elevate the scapula? There are only two that David says I need to know, really. So which one of the two could it be possibly talking about? Then you look at your answers and try to match that up, all right? So we will go over today all of the bony landmarks that you need to know, all of the origins and insertions that I think you need to know, and all of the muscle actions that I think you need to know, and the muscles that perform those actions, okay? So a lot of information. Like I said, if you want to take notes, you can. If you have my study guide, this is all in your book, but I like to kind of get things rolling so we can get through this as quickly as possible, right? We want to make sure we actually get through all of this, and me talking like this doesn't really help, does it? But okay, I've got my, I talk about my box of bones. Here's my box of bones. Luckily, I can once in a while actually find the bone that I'm looking for. So we'll start with this bone. What is this bone?
Scapula.
The scapula. Okay. Which side of the scapula is this?
The right side.
The right side. So this is the left side. Try again.
Interior.
This is the anterior side?
Yeah.
How do you know?
Because the spine of the scapula is on the other side.
There you go. Yeah, the spine of the scapula is always on the posterior side, right? So if you don't see the spine of the scapula, you know that this is the anterior side. So if you were to look at my scapula, if I were see-through, this is what it would look like right here, okay? This is the front of the scapula. So even though the scapula is on the posterior side of the body, it still has an anterior side, okay? So anterior scapula, posterior scapula. What am I going to start with? Let's start with, we're on the posterior side. Let's just do some of the structures on the posterior side first. We'll start with this big thing right here, this big thing sticking out. And you can actually palpate that on yourself right here on your shoulder. It's that big notch right at the tip of the shoulder. What is that?
Acromion process.
The Acromion process. What does acro mean? The medical term acro. Remember, I always say you got to know your medical terms. What do you think? Nobody. Already stumped. Acro means extremity, okay? So just think, if this is the acromion process, that's where the extremity attaches to the body, right? The acromion process. Okay, so we have a couple muscles that attach to the acromion process. One originates and one inserts. So when a muscle originates on a bone, does it move it? If a muscle originates on the scapula, does it move the scapula?
No.
No? You sure?
Origins attach, insertion moves.
Well, origins and insertions both attach. But does this, if a muscle originates on the scapula, does it move the scapula? When I ask, are you sure? You can say yes. So are you sure that it doesn't move the bone?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. It does not move a bone. So if a muscle originates on a bone, 99% of the time, it does not move that bone. Now, in some extreme circumstances, it can actually move the bone. Like if your shoulders are locked in place like this, like if you're hanging from a bar like this, and you move your hip, if you rotate your hip up on one side, your latissimus dorsi, even though it originates on the pelvis, will actually move the pelvis, but only when it's locked in place like this and this isn't moving. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Leaving me hanging. Okay. So if a muscle inserts on a bone, does it move that bone?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so origins don't move bones, insertions move bones. Okay, so generally with origins and insertions, when we have specifically the muscles of the limbs, the upper limb and lower limb, the origin is going to be more proximal than the insertion. Okay, so that's how that works. So the origin is going to start like with the rotator cuff muscles. So if we got like supraspinatus right up here, that is more proximal, the origin, than the insertion right here on the greater trochanter or greater tubercle, right? Right?
Yes.
Right.
Thank you. So this is more proximal than this. This is closer to the rest of the body than this. Just think about biceps brachii. The origins are up here. The insertion is all the way down here. This is more proximal than this, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and that only really applies to the muscles of the limbs, okay? So don't overthink it with muscles of like the back or the trunk or the neck or anything like that. It doesn't work that way with those muscles, unfortunately. Just if it's a muscle of the limb, the origin is more proximal than the insertion, okay? So let's get back to these muscles.
Wait, can you say that again?
With the muscles that attach to the limbs, the origin is more proximal than the insertion. So the insertion is more distal than the origin. Okay, it's just further away. Got it?
Yes.
Okay. So let's go over the muscles that attach to the acromion process. So one originates. So does it move that bone?
No. No.
And one inserts. So it does move that bone. Okay. Let's start with the one that originates on the acromion process. Okay. Just think about where that bone is, where that part of that bone is in your body, and think about muscles that are in that area.
The deltoid.
Deltoid, okay? Deltoid has 3 different fibers. It has an anterior, middle, and posterior fiber to it. Which fiber would originate on the acromion process?
The middle.
The middle deltoid, right? So you think about where it is. I mean, it's pretty close to the posterior side of the body right here, but it does kind of wrap over onto the middle portion of that muscle. So the middle deltoid originates on the acromion process, okay? And of course, you can check out all these muscles in your book after we're done, and you can really see where they match up. I have them labeled too, so you can always check that out. Okay, so that muscle originates on the acromion process. So does it move the scapula?
No.
No.
No. So deltoid does nothing to the scapula, okay? None of the fibers move the scapula at all. Just doesn't work, okay? So what muscle inserts onto the scapula, onto the acromion process? Excuse me. Trapezius?
Trapezius.
Okay. Which fibers?
Upper fibers.
Which one?
Upper.
Yeah, the upper fibers of the trapezius. Just think about where it is, right? We have 3 fibers of the trapezius. We have upper, middle, and lower fibers. Okay, so the upper fibers would go from right up here and right down here onto the acromion process. And I've been lifting some weight. I'm trying to work on my trapezius a little bit. You know, I got enormous arms, but my trapezius is lacking, unfortunately. Whatever. So what action might the trapezius do, the upper fibers, when it pulls on the acromion process? When muscles contract, the insertion moves towards the origin, okay? So if the insertion moved towards the origin up here, what action is going to be performed?
Flexion.
Shrugging your shoulders.
What is the scientific term for shrugging your shoulders?
Elevation.
Elevation.
Elevation of the scapula, right?